Over 800 film and TV professionals, including stars like Gary Lineker, Miriam Margolyes, and Riz Ahmed, have signed a letter urging the BBC to reinstate its film documenting the life of children and young people in Gaza. The film, Gaza, How to Survive a War Zone, was pulled after it emerged that the central narrator was the 14-year-old son of a deputy agricultural minister in the territory's government, which of course is run by Hamas's political wing. The letter, addressed to the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, condemned the move as an act of censorship. The letter states this: "This film is an essential piece of journalism offering an all-too-rare perspective on the lived experiences of Palestinian children living in unimaginable circumstances, which amplifies voices so often silenced. It deserves recognition, not politically motivated censorship. Beneath this political football are children who are in the most dire circumstances of their young lives. This is what must remain at the heart of this discussion. As programme makers, we are extremely alarmed by the intervention of partisan political actors on this issue and what this means for the future of broadcasting in this country. Calls to remove the documentary from iPlayer and social media set a dangerous precedent. As media professionals, we are extremely alarmed by the intervention of political actors, including foreign diplomats, and what this means for the future of broadcasting in this country." Now, it is true that the documentary was pulled not because it was found to be saying anything untrue or misleading. Rather, it was pulled because of a backlash surrounding a family member of one of the child presenters. So essentially a personal attack, an ad hominem attack, rather than anything to do with the actual content of the film. Now, the open letter addressed this, stating, "Capitulating to such attempts to block the film's reinstatement to iPlayer would signal that Palestinian children's stories are only valid if their families pass arbitrary purity tests." It also argued that the BBC's decision reflected a double standard in which Palestinians are not given the ability to speak openly and honestly about their own conditions. Silencing a child's first-hand account of survival in Gaza, where over 13,000 children have been killed since October 2023, is not about compliance, but about erasing Palestinian suffering. The BBC must resist political pressure aimed at suppressing narratives that humanize Palestinians. Now, that is a really important point that the letter made and raises the question about whether opponents of the film are interested in any stories making it out from Palestinians in Gaza, period. Take a look at this interview between Nick Ferrari and journalist and author Rachel Shabi.
If we stay with this film, though, the Director General says it shouldn't be transmitted. The board says it shouldn't be transmitted. But shouldn't we have been told that the narrator was the son of someone who works for Hamas? How can you defend putting representatives of, or children of representatives of Hamas on a documentary? Hamas is a proscribed organisation. I ask again, how can you put this film out if you have the imprimatur of the BBC and allow this to have been made in this fashion without any editorial checks?
Have you seen this film, Nick?
I've only seen excerpts of it, and I don't intend to watch it all either, no.
So Nick Ferrari is rallying against the documentary that he not only hasn't watched, but has no intention of ever watching. Had Nick Ferrari actually watched the film, he would have learned about all the ways in which the 4 children who host the documentary are currently surviving a genocide being leveled against their people. He would have learned about 10-year-old Renad, who, after her school was shut down, started a TikTok cookery channel where she prepares meals on a camping stove against the backdrop of falling bombs. He would have learned about 11-year-old Zakaria, who, after being separated from his parents, now lives at Al-Aqsa Hospital, where he volunteers with the ambulance crews. And he would have also learned about Rana, a young pregnant mother trying to survive being displaced in a war zone. But Nick Ferrari, it seems, isn't interested in those stories. Instead, he wants to discredit the entire film because one of the children in it has a father who works in the Gaza government, which, yes, is run by Hamas because that is the Strip's only governing structure. And it begs the question, would he have the same problems if a similar documentary about Israeli children, say, included the child of an IDF soldier serving in an army currently under investigation by the ICC for genocide? To talk more about the letter, I spoke earlier to Khalid Abdalla, one of the signatories of the letter. He's an acclaimed actor who you may know from his roles in The Crown, as well as in films like United 98, The Green Zone, and The Kite Runner. I began by asking him what he thinks will happen if the BBC uphold their decision to remove the documentary.
If you zoom out, 13,000 is the lowest estimate of children that have been killed. A genocide is taking place. And a documentary has been made about children, in which the main focus is children's experience of war in Gaza. And in that context, the BBC has decided to take this documentary down and been unable to somehow defend the original commissioning decision. The reason given is because Abdalla, who narrates the documentary, but is clearly not in any way the author of the documentary, his father is a deputy agricultural minister in Gaza. And we're in a world in which, literally, last night, Donald Trump posted an AI-generated video of him lying by a swimming pool next to Netanyahu, sipping cocktails, while Elon Musk has dollars flying from the sky and the rubble of Gaza is turned into a Riviera. And there is no outcry. We have an outcry because a 13-year-old boy who has somehow survived a genocide, his voice has been used to narrate a documentary. And yet, alongside everything else, we have tame responses from the BBC in relation to Donald Trump's calls for ethnic cleansing, or those kind of crazy scenes that we all saw by the fireside in the White House with him and Netanyahu. A tameness in relation to all of that. So for me, it's kind of, you kind of want to look at the world and say, just like, wake up. Did this letter that complained to the BBC about the documentary mention those 13,000 children? Did it mention that there was a genocide? Was it concerned about the displacement of almost the entirety of the population of Gaza? Is it concerned about the children who are being killed week after week after week? So for me, it's deeply sad that an institution that, frankly, I care about, right? I care that we have a BBC, and I want our BBC to be doing what it should be doing. And it's deeply sad that things have eroded to such an extent that even under these circumstances, it's unable to stand up for what is clearly the case. So yeah, that's the basics of how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think that question about what feels like the erosion of the BBC in this context is so important. I mean, what precedent are you concerned could be set if the BBC does uphold their decision to remove this documentary? What does it mean for Palestinian voices in the media and for the BBC's approach to the Palestine issue in general?
It acts as another form of silencing. And I think, frankly, that's what's essentially behind this at some deep level, right? Because you might guess that the next time something that is going to be done about children in Gaza or about Palestine, you know, that there will be more red tape and more bureaucracy and more, you know, around the idea of it because it's such a hot button issue, right? And so it has long-term silencing, chilling effects. It shifts the Overton window, right? Or it narrows the Overton window kind of hugely over what we can talk about. And you know, this is sure, let them do an investigation into how this happened. But frankly, the deep investigation that should be being carried out, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure the day will come, right, is how our entire media establishment has been so ineffective and so silent in the context of a genocide taking place. My entire childhood and adulthood and education was entirely centered correctly around the words never again. And then the time comes when this is happening, and our media establishment prides itself on the apparent both sidesism, right, of a debate and washes its hands. To me, that's what we should really be talking about here. A genocide has happened on the media establishment's watch. It is still happening, right? The ethnic cleansing of Gaza might be about to happen on the media establishment's watch. And we're talking about a 13-year-old boy who, by the way, has the right to be a 13-year-old boy. And, they call him a senior Hamas official. He is the deputy agricultural minister who has been, as far as I understand, working on agricultural things. He's not accused of killing anybody. Whereas Netanyahu is accused of being a war criminal and is being invited to sit in the White House, in front of the fire and gloat while Donald Trump talks about ethnic cleansing Gaza.
The bizarre exceptionalism that you talk about, whenever reports or instances where Palestinians are producing films or documentaries or art or even just media reports of their conditions, it's subject to this incredible, unique amount of scrutiny and so-called editorial standards. What is it about the Palestinian issue that provokes this level of threat within the establishment?
I mean, frankly, we Arabs are looked at as if the secret that we hide is that we are racist and that we are anti-Semitic. And that is a deeply racist gaze towards us, right? That we are not to be trusted, that our humanity somehow has to be double proved and triple checked and given all the, and our experience is somehow not valid, right? Unless it is given, I don't know, some kind of like ridiculous sort of standard of approval that is not ours. I mean, and that's just a deeply racist assumption. Regardless of the political aspects of this, right? This is a deeply humanitarian issue. And this is about a rules-based, rights-based order that is being destroyed with huge consequences for every other cause that matters. Whether it's Ukraine or whether it's Sudan or whether it's any humanitarian issue around the world, right? International law is being destroyed. And that's why you had Daniel Levy just a couple of days ago, going out and talking about the huge danger that is being created by this, this total impunity in the face of such extraordinary abuse of international law and killing of civilians. Even if you don't accept that it's a genocide, you know that at least 13,000 children have been killed, right? And the reason that it's important to focus on children in that regard is because there is no question as to whether or not they are civilians, right? Let's assume that every single other person was not a civilian, right? 13,000 children. What does that point to?
And it speaks to that kind of threshold of innocence that Palestinians have to reach in order to be heard. And even then, they will find a way to sort of discredit that voice. I mean, looking at the backlash against the documentary as well. I mean, earlier we showed a clip of Nick Ferrari. You might have seen it. He's one of the people who was really advocating for the BBC to uphold its decision to remove the documentary. And he basically said that even though he's making all these claims about the documentary, he hasn't even watched it and he never intends to. What does that tell us about the people that are calling for this documentary to be taken down?
It tells me that they're credulous, on the one side, right? They hear the headline and therefore they immediately believe what's being said about this documentary rather than being able to watch it for themselves. And with that then comes the assumption of how easy it is to discredit any Palestinian or Arab or, so-called pro-Palestinian voice. There is nothing in the letters, right, that as far as I have seen, talks about anything substantive in terms of what actually takes place in the documentary. And so it ends up reading as if the main aim is basically to prevent this kind of thing from being commissioned. The truth is we need more of these things to be done. The truth is that it's a miracle that anything was made of this, anything was made under the extreme circumstances that people are surviving through in Gaza. And frankly, from my perspective, when you watch it, the documentary is at pains to be balanced, right, in terms of how it presents the details, to anticipate criticisms or things that were said about particular events. And clearly they made an assumption that they were working with a child, right? In terms of this narration, right? That the humanity of a child and the voice of a child under this context is so degraded. To me, it's kind of equivalent to what are you supposed to? Half of the establishment in this country are at some level. A lot of them are the descendants of slave owners, right? Or the descendants of Vichy France, or the descendants of fascist Italy. Do we completely discredit them as being the children of whatever their parents did? It's absurd, And somehow that's the kind of weird criticism that's kind of, leveled at this side. That what is Nick Ferrari or other people, what have they been watching? Of the, for me, some of the most painful videos that I've watched in the context of Gaza have not been the most violent of the videos, right? They have been of children waking up in hospital beds, looking up, whose families have been entirely obliterated, looking up, recognizing no one. That is the reality that they should be talking about day in, day out. This morning, Nick Ferrari should have been talking about Donald Trump's video that he tweeted that he tweeted to the world as president of the United States, not a 13-year-old boy in Gaza.
For me, many of the most disturbing videos that have come out of it have even been of IDF soldiers filming themselves in the rubble, laughing about the children's toys or women's clothing that they're, parading as like spoils of war.
The sad thing is that there are genres, right? There are genres now of these videos, whether it's exactly kind of the celebration at destroying buildings or universities or hospitals or killing or children's toys, or whether it's the children waking up, or whether it's, waking up recognizing no one, or whether it's the looking through the rubble. There's a lot of stuff which is a layer beyond what gets through to, people who are looking away, because either it's too painful or they just don't want to know. I just did something about it recently at the Tate Gallery. One of the things, the sound of drones, which you hear, by the way, in the film, if you're careful and you're listening, the sound of drones has not stopped in Gaza throughout this time, and as far as I'm aware, still continues post-ceasefire. That drone is constantly telling the entire population that they are not safe and that you must be hypervigilant constantly. Like, what is this? And then you can kind of go on to the, websites of, arms manufacturers who are celebrating the quadcopters with sniper rifles or with the capacity to kind of work together to slaughter, right? And then you see the other side of those videos of like people talking about there are quadcopters that play the sound of babies in order to lure people out of their refuge and be shot because they thought they were going to go and save a child. That's what we should be talking about.
We are at a curious time, and probably these things are connected, where both the public consciousness around Palestine is higher than it has been for a really long time, and the suppression of that consciousness is also at a really high point. What do you make of that of that dynamic, and do you feel within your industry that in general, despite these kinds of calls from the top to silence Palestine and to silence Palestinian voices and voices in support of Palestine, is that working on the ground? Do you feel within your industry that suppression is effective? Or have you found, given that over 700 people and counting have signed this letter, that public consciousness is still increasing and is piercing through that?
Yes, I mean, I believe that we are at a moment of a major shift in global consciousness. And I think that is a huge achievement of the last 18 months, albeit at an unconscionable and very painful cost. I think people can see and know what this is. And what I have experienced is that there is a huge amount of silent solidarity that is working out how to express itself alongside the swell of vocal solidarity that we've seen increase over the last year and a half, and I believe will continue to increase, hopefully until the occupation ends and we have peace in Palestine, right? And Israel, right? So what I see is in general positive. However, there is, of course, we understand that this is a deeply polarizing issue that is not complex at its core, but complicated to talk about, right? There is nothing complex for me about being against occupation. There's nothing complex at its core about being against apartheid or being against genocide. However, it is complicated to talk about. Because yes, we do have to be careful what words we use. We have to be very conscientious about anti-Semitism and things being weaponized and instrumentalized in the wrong way. And we have to honor the legacy of the Holocaust as we talk about this genocide in Gaza. And this is, these are complicated, big things to talk about, which means we also have to make space within the cultural and media landscapes to really open up and talk about these difficult things, because we know that the silence that we've lived up until this moment brought us to this moment, brought us to October 7th and the disaster of what has followed since then. So whatever side you count yourself on, we can't go back to the discourse that led us there. We have to move beyond it, and we have to make space for it, and we have to make it safe.